Happy Friday and welcome back to our Question Pro Fireside Chats. Again, we've got a great guest today, Sean Soley, joining us from Zoopla. He's actually the Research Operations Manager over there. And it's one of those where you don't really hear that title too often, Research Operations Manager. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for people to learn. What is that? What does a Research Operations Manager do? And really have somebody like Sean take us through it. So Sean, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
And that is a real background for those of you who thought it was fake. I actually did, but Sean's like, he's got the most, it's better than my background. So I'm a little jealous here.
It takes a lot. Well, what you won't see is me frantically cleaning up and making sure that everything was tidy beforehand. But I owe a lot of it.
It's hard to manage the real background, right?
Oh yeah, I owe most of the background to the cheese plant behind me, Brie, which is what we call her. She's a lot of work, but she's pretty great.
I love it. I love it. Well, this is going to be a really amazing show. It's really not a topic that we've covered before. And as we were kind of discussing in the pre-show, I don't think there's actually many research operations managers around. But I think every insights team is thinking about this, and somebody is having to kind of pick up the research operations role, right? What's the tech stack going to be? How are we managing data? How are we enabling our teams to kind of do research in an agile and responsible way? And so this is going to be, I think, a really, really enlightening show for many of our viewers. And for those of you tuning in, there will definitely be time for questions, so do post them and we'll make sure Sean gets to them. But Sean, why don't we maybe start at the beginning? Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your career and kind of how you landed up as the Research Operations Manager at Zoopla.
Yeah, of course. So I've actually been working now professionally for about 4 years. Beforehand, I was at the University of Sussex where I studied psychology. Always interested in human behavior, and as a result, I was always really interested in the research side of it, so actually conducting the research, talking to people. So I was always really interested in that side of things. So naturally, I wanted to actually go into research after university, and I saw this role pop up for research operations. I was like, okay, so this looks interesting. Checked it out, and so it combined two things. I was interested in the research side of it, obviously the product research side of it, but also the admin. At the time was called admin, but more the operational side of it in terms of the processes behind enabling research. And I had some experience in sort of that admin side of operation side of it, so I thought I'd go for it. And that was I joined Deliveroo as a research operations manager. Really learned the basics, really learned everything about not just about research operations, but user research, product design, how it interacts with business. It was a really, really great time. I had some great senior leaders there that really helped train me up, show me the ropes and everything else. And then after 2 years at Deliveroo, I moved here at Zoopla, which again in a research operations role. And I think it'd be 2 years next year. So wow. That's my sort of history so far.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit more about that kind of decision after uni to kind of go down the research ops path, right? So you kind of look, I think, you hear this from so many researchers, right? It's like, it's kind of in uni where you really kind of build that passion, that excitement for research. And then most people go into a research management role or stick in academics and kind of go down the research within academia route, right? And those are two very well-paved paths for people that are coming out of uni. But this research operations thing, that's a bit of a risk, right? I mean, that's not a well-worn path. So what was it in your mind that kind of got you over that edge to say, you know what, I'm going to take a different route here and not follow this well-worn path that many, many hundreds of uni students have gone down before? What was it that kind of said, you know what, I'm going to take this risk?
Well, initially I saw it as a stepping stone. It's just like I wasn't going on to do a master's or a PhD. I didn't want to follow the academic route. I knew I wanted to take my research skills into the business, into a company. So I saw the research operations role as a stepping stone to learn the basics, learn the behind the scenes almost, learn on the job, and then go into user research. But then as I actually started to understand the role more, the mechanics behind it, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the idea that your role is to help enable not just your user researchers, but the people beyond that. So anyone who's interested in research, from your designers to beyond that, to help them, enable them to do research. I enjoyed answering questions, understand the processes, and making sure that things were really efficient. So when there was always opportunities to sort of maybe jump into research or even with there. But I just found I really liked the behind the scenes of it. I really liked being that enabler. So yeah, and for now it's something that I want to continue doing anyway. I'm not ever closing the door fully on jumping over, but I really do enjoy the ReSops role. And I definitely would encourage anyone out who's currently in uni or doing whatever, not to write it off. It's definitely a great way to learn the behind the scenes, the mechanics of how user research, design, and tech work together. And yeah, really, really great stepping stone.
Makes sense. Well, it's a good segue. Why don't you kind of give us just a quick description of what is a research operations manager? What kind of goes into the role?
Yeah, happy to. And I can, there's like an amazing resource that actually really captures what the research operations role is. And if I get a second, I'll post a link in the comment section. There's to a mural board that basically highlights an overall what research operations in, and I use it. I still refer back to it regularly just to help keep me on track. And it sort of breaks down to a few key things. So there's obviously the research recruitment side of it. So this can either be direct participant recruitment for your team or working on the processes behind that to build it so that your user research recruitment is really seamless and easy there so anyone can do it. So that's one major aspect. That's what a lot of people who know of ResearchOps would associate it with, just that sort of recruitment side of it. But then there's loads of other things as well as knowledge management. So this is all about making the research that is being done findable, relevant, and understandable. So not just hidden away in a Google Drive somewhere, but actually accessible by the whole business and actually has some longevity to it. So you're not accidentally repeating research. There's also asset management, and this is more about how the like sort of the personal raw data you might collect with research, how that's handled and when that's stored. And that kind of work that goes hand in hand with the governance side of things, which is all about keeping research ethical, legal, following data compliance rules. And so those two go hand in hand. And that's a vast majority of my job. And a lot of the day-to-day stuff is actually just making sure that any research is being done, that I'm making sure that it's legal, it's following GDPR because we're based in Europe. And that's a major part of the role that definitely goes unnoticed. And then you've got your other typical things like budget and tooling management. So this goes from your research incentive budgets, looking after your tooling budgets, working with finance to ensure that you're staying within budget, or when it comes to a renewal of a tool, that you're making sure that the tooling is in budget. And that's one element of it. But the other element is also I'm constantly talking to different companies and constantly exploring what's out there, because you never know when suddenly there's going to be a huge price hike and you need to pivot to another direction. So I'm also always on top of what's up and coming in the industry. And with that, the other sort of major thing is sort of the guideline and templating of management of it. So guideline process is all about ensuring that however you're doing research, you're building out guidelines and templates that enables that to make it really efficient. And then working on that. So it's not just, hey, I've just implemented this new process for you to follow that helps you do research. It's also then actually doing a bit of a meta-esque research of your research practice to make sure that it's working efficiently and you're doing it in the best way. So that, in a nutshell, is at a high level sort of what I do. And then there's a few other things I focus on more than others, naturally. What
are some of those that you focus on more than others? How do you kind of split up your time across the 5 or 6 kind of categories?
Well, there's a few that are very sort of like day-to-day, week-to-week, that are a bit of a short-term thing. So the governance and the asset management side of it, that's more of a short day-to-day, just making sure, staying on top of things, working with legal, working with your researchers and people to make sure they're informed and they're treating personal data right. And then there's sort of a lot of the other ones can be broken down into sort of mini projects almost. So I was actually brought into Zoopla to focus on 2 things initially. One of them was our knowledge management process. We have the Google Drive, and anyone who knows Google Drive, it's amazing, but it's also a bit of it can be a bit of a disaster. We're losing track of where things live, losing track of findings, and not knowing where things are living. So my job was to come in to sort out the Google Drive for research and actually go beyond that to see how we could make insights and research more accessible. And we work with a brilliant company called Julo that are fantastic and really makes it easy for us and it makes it easy for our researchers to go away, do their research, and then share back their findings and then make sure those findings are saved somewhere that everyone in the business can access and are going to live on beyond just the project date. So that was one major project that I worked on initially. And the other side of it is the research recruitment side of it. And that was sort of split into two phases. The first phase, and this is mainly on the B2B side. B2C is very straightforward. We have usertesting.com, and working at Zoopla, a vast majority of people will go through some sort of housing, buying, renting process in their life. So we do have a huge audience on the B2C side. So that, touch wood, is always quite straightforward. My focus was on the B2B side and improving that. And this was sort of two steps. One was improving our general how we go about doing recruitment, how looking at alternative ways of recruiting. And the other side of that was building a panel of B2B estate agents who are the main people we do B2B research with. And with anyone in the B2B space, they're extremely difficult to get a hold of. They're very time poor, very busy people. So we decided that actually building out a panel of reliable users who are keen to do research, keen to give feedback, was going to be a more effective way than just every single time we had a new project, starting fresh and going again.
Makes a lot of sense. And I know Sean kind of gave a nice talk at our X Day all about kind of how he built that panel. We'll get that linked in the comments. We also have linked the mural board that Sean's talking about with kind of the different categories in research ops. I mean, there's just information flying around in this session, and we're only 10 minutes in. So hopefully everybody is getting their money's worth on this one, and keep the comments coming here. But Sean, there's actually quite a bit that you've described, right? I mean, recruitment, knowledge management, asset management, which kind of goes with the compliance and governance, budget tooling, and then, guidance and templates, which is obviously an ongoing thing, right? I mean, you're constantly having to kind of ramp the team up and new people are joining. Wow, there's a lot there, especially when most insights teams don't even have this role. They're all down to doing somewhere else. So when you joined Deliveroo, were you like the first research operations manager? Was there a team of operations managers? I'm just trying to understand, like, how are companies typically staffing up the research operations manager group?
I was very fortunate when I joined Deliveroo. They were at the time ahead of the game when it came to their research operations team. They also had a brilliant design operations team as well when I joined. So I joined and there was an existing research operations manager. And then just shortly after I joined, we had a dedicated knowledge manager join as well. And I can tell you how amazing that was to have a dedicated knowledge manager, because I learned so much from them. And they went on to really do amazing things and just change how we saw our insights and everything else. So, and us working alongside our design operations partners as well, it was a really mature organization. There was, unfortunately, as a result of most companies, we did go through a redundancy phase and the team was reduced down just to me. But even then, just having a research operations team alongside the researchers is hugely beneficial, beneficial. As you were just alluding to, researchers and teams who don't have ops, they're having to do their very, very difficult job of conducting research, writing up reports, and then presenting them, but also taking those insights and going on roadshows, being present in meetings, giving their feedback. And on top of that, they're usually having to do a lot of everything what I just mentioned. And so especially with the maybe budget control, tooling control, making sure that you're being a bit of an admin for the tooling as well, enabling other people to do stuff. Also your knowledge management. So as a research team without an ops team are busy. But so with an ops team, I take away almost like 70% of the ops side that the researcher will have to do, which means they can just purely focus on being present and doing research and being sure and going away to the business and ensuring that they are getting the best insights possible. The impact I would like to think the researchers have because of an ops team is truly an amazing thing to see. Yeah. So I learned a lot from Deliveroo. It was a very, very great experience. And everything I learned there, I've taken straight into Zoopla. And because I worked similarly over there on the B2B side of things as well, working with restaurant owners, kitchen staff, trying to recruit them, or trying to recruit delivery riders as well, which is very, very tricky, but very fun group of people to work with.
What was it Deliveroo or Zoopla that kind of made the need for a research operations manager or research operations team apparent? Is there a recommendation that you can give people to say, hey, once you have a certain number of researchers, this role makes sense, or once you're doing a certain number of studies, like how do you think about the scale at which, okay, a research operations manager actually makes sense?
I think it makes sense as soon as you're looking at if you say you haven't got a dedicated user research team, say you want to build one, or even if you want to bring in 1 or 2 people, that's the right time to get one research operations person. Because obviously they can then work in tandem, even if it is like at Zoopla at the moment, we have 2 dedicated user researchers, but our entire design team do research. We've got PMs who are doing research. So all because you have a dedicated team doesn't mean you don't have people also doing research in some capacity. So if you have one person that you bring into the business to do dedicated user research, now's the time to bring in that ops person to fully support their endeavors, as well as support other people to do research as well. And then I've seen a variety of different numbers and ways of doing it, but I think once you start to build your team up to maybe 5 or more, that's the time to start considering bringing in 2 people, and then it goes up. I've seen quite a few different ways, but it comes down to the maturity of your team, the maturity of your business, and just how many people you have. Because I know of the big companies who have hundreds of user research and designers, and they've got teams maybe 20 plus ops people, just to help. It really is depending on how much research you're doing and what the scale and what you're trying to do in the future. But definitely, the one thing I do know is as soon as you're looking at bringing in a user researcher, or even if your team is already doing research, that's a great time to bring in an ops person.
So, you've mentioned this kind of word, user research, right? And the user researcher role. And that's, I think, one of the things that, like, I'm an avid fan of both Deliveroo and Zoopla. Right. And I think a lot of people in the UK are, because it's just such a great experience. Like the mobile apps just work, the support just works. Like you can really tell so much thought has been put into the user experience. Is there something unique about user research that kind of requires a research operations manager versus, as kind of a comparison point? There's lots of insights teams that are pumping out brand research and brand trackers and claims tests and advertising tests, and they're doing hundreds of these a year, but they don't maybe have research operations managers. Is there something different about user research versus kind of maybe more traditional market research?
You raise a good point, and there really isn't. I just think it's where tech have sort of led the conversation on research operations, user research. That I think we're naturally just that little bit further ahead. But you're totally right. In that more traditional sort of space, they could do 100% with an ops person to support within their endeavors. And actually, at Zoopla, a lot of the insights that our research and insights team produce, I'm also making sure that they're being saved somewhere alongside our user research. No point just saving one and not the other.
Right. Well, I think one of the things about these kind of tech companies that do hire a lot of user researchers, right, where their focus is kind of on the user experience and user research, they've kind of come from this place where they're fully instrumented to actually measure the revenue impact of changes, right? So Zoopla and Deliveroo know, like, if we can really nail these 3 screens and get 5% more people to reach out to an agent or get quotes or get 5% higher conversion rate on the shopping cart or increase in value, like that is millions and millions of pounds of revenue. And we can track that all the way through, right? And so then they invest more in research and research operations. Did you kind of find that that's maybe why? And is there something about the tech stack or the instrumentation that makes the ROI much more clear in these kind of tech companies that are focused on user research?
You know what? You probably hit on the head there. Yeah, I'd assume so. While I like to think sometimes my role is a little bit sort of behind the scenes, similar to how your IT team works. We're behind the scenes, but it's the work that goes unseen will then enable, like, just taking away all that work from our researchers so they can focus on producing the insights that then they can recommend, that then levels up into those revenue streams that you've spoken about. It all makes an impact massively.
Yeah, makes sense. So tell us a little bit more about that tech stack. You obviously own the research tech stack. You're kind of thinking about the tooling, the tech. what does that landscape look like for you? What should a tech stack look like for a modern research team?
Well, if you've got the financial capability to do so, you should try and either get one tool that can do a lot of things, or just get the right tools that do the job you're looking for. My recommendation is, if you were in a startup, there are so many sort of research tools that are coming out that now are trying to offer an all-in-one package, which if you're starting from scratch, I think it's a good place to start. Where we're a bit more of a senior company, got a lot of legacy tools. We're now in the phase of, we're trying to find things that fit in with what other tools we have together. So we obviously have, we have usertesting.com, which is a big tool. A lot of companies use it. That it's amazing for our B2C side of things. So that sort of covers a whole sort of recruitment space for our consumer side. It's taken care of there. The one thing we were looking at, and the reason why we sort of started a relationship with Question Pro, was on that B2B side. We didn't really have anything other than a few internal processes of going to recruit reliably B2B estate agents. So we knew that we needed a research panel tool that could host and look after this audience really easily. And that's why we decided to go with Question Pro. It slotted in so nicely with our existing tool stack. And it came with the added bonus of the surveying capabilities. We didn't have, at the time anyway, we didn't have any sort of dedicated surveying tooling other than your Google Forms that naturally come with Google Drive, which, not to say it's not an amazing tool to have. Like, if you have the Google Drive but nothing else, the Google Drive can provide you with the most basic forms of doing research. But that surveying capability has really helped up on our quant game, so that we can has helped. We're a qual-focused user research team, but not to say that we don't use quant to help back up a lot of, or vice versa, back each other up. But there's and then you've got to find the tool that works for you, and that does mean digging around, talking to a lot of people, and making sure you find something that works for you and your scenarios. Like, there's a lot of companies out there right now that do very similar things, but all slightly different. So making sure you take the time to talk to everyone, ask the right questions, and make sure it works and slots in for how you work. I think if you're having to change the entire way you work for one tool, I think that's a bit of a question mark with a red flag.
And tell me a little bit about like the other side of the equation, right? So you kind of have, as you think about kind of the research ops budget, right? Obviously tools are going to be a big chunk of that. And then obviously the kind of audience, right? And the recruitment is also going to be a big part of that. How do you think about the two, right? I mean, there's a lot of insights teams out there that don't even touch their own audience, right? They're always going to external panel, external sample. And then you've got, folks where either they're building their own research panel like you are on the B2B side, or they just have a lot of users like you guys have on the B2C side. And then you kind of are shooting out emails and giving out gifts. Like, tell me a little bit about that continuum. Where do you think about building your own panel versus external recruitment versus just using your email lists and tapping into that, which I know can have a lot of political battles too, right? The marketing teams sometimes own those lists and they're already sending out emails. So maybe kind of walk through that continuum and what you think the best practices are there.
It's so tricky because I think you have to first establish where you're at with your recruitment journey, and also where you're at with your research endeavors. If you need to be doing a lot of research and very quickly, then sure, I can see. And if you don't have a dedicated ops team, for example, or you've got a small research team, then sure, going external is going to be an effective avenue for you, because they can take away a lot of the stress when it comes to recruitment, the incentives, the consent. I totally get that. But once I think you've established where you're at internally and you've started to bring in a few tools, establish some processes, I think that's when it's time to start to look internally. I think there's huge sort of cost savings as well with moving internally. And that was one aspect of what we were trying to do. But we also knew that the audience that we wanted to talk to, even on the B2B side, while hard to reach, it was there. It was like we were not that we've done a lot of external research, but with the delivery, we were international. So we did rely on a lot of external support in some cases when it was going international. The audience was still there, even if it was an international audience. We just maybe didn't have the processes in place, or the confidence to go away, or the timescales. But once you start to mature, understand the best practices internally, that's when I think it's worth moving to an internal approach. maybe going by those emails, get a bit of a better relationship with marketing so you're not annoying each other. Or it's just all sort of swings on just where you're at and what are your sort of objectives and the speed that you're working at. It makes sense for Zoopla that we've gone internally. We've got like you said, got a huge audience on the B2C side, so it's very straightforward to us to recruit there. On the B2B, we never even while I've been here, we haven't done external recruitment support. But even before I had joined, when they were still having problems, even if they had gone external, it's still a really hard audience to hit. So you could be hiring a company to help you out and still maybe only hitting maybe 3 or 4 of the points on your criteria. So that's also a major thing as well. It's just ensuring that who you're working with, if they're that niche, then you're going to have to go internal. But there's no right or wrong way about it. It's just what works for you at the time.
I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of people also, it's just so easy to get external, right? I mean, when you're kind of going after more of a consumer audience, right? I think it's just so easy that people stick with that, but they don't realize like those costs really add up, right? If you're kind of going and recruiting every single time new, especially the more kind of niche your audience gets. And I think the thing that I think a lot of researchers are surprised by when they start to kind of build their own panel is like, oh, actually, a lot of people are excited to give us feedback. You know, they don't just have to be strangers sitting on these external panels that are just going through for rewards, right? That actually you're going to get
exactly. And I think, I mean, if we're just talking about costs with the B2B side, if we were, say we were using an external company and then we decided to actually now go and build our own panel, yes, you might need to invest in a tool to ensure that you can host that. But now we're saving so much money when we do research with the panel. We have a credit-based system, so they take part in research, they earn credits, and then they can use those credits to redeem vouchers. But that's a more cost-effective method than even in going internally. Okay, we need to recruit 5 people. We have to offer this much money or this amount in vouchers, which that costs more to run that project than it does to recruit internally. It catches itself back up with the tool investment eventually. But it's massively beneficial to take the time to, even if you need to hire a ReSops person, get the right tooling in, short-term costs or long-term costs. But for the long term, moving away from external to internal is so beneficial. Plus, all of that data then you have. It's not having to track hands. Asset wise and compliance wise, it's just a lot easier that you're looking after all of that. Plus, and then the emphasis is back on your team. You don't have to worry about maybe a lack of standards from an external company. Not to say that I've luckily never had a bad experience, but I've heard horror stories.
Well, and I think that like that data ownership thing is a key one too, right? Because these things can then build on each other, right? As you do progressive profiling in your own panel, you're going to know more and more about that panel over time, right? So you'll start to then be able to sub-segment down and say, all right, I just want to find estate agents that deal with, houses in this price range. Well, if you ask that on an existing survey, now you're going to have that data in your panel versus an external panel is never going to be able to give you that, right? Every single time you're going to have to go through the natural fallout and get to these low incidence rates. And now you're like, cool, I can just target the people that I need to, right? And then every time you survey them, you get more and more data to kind of build out your targeting and your subsampling. And that just gives you a much, much richer data set at the end of the day.
Yeah. And we always make sure we utilize the panel, but we still utilize non-panelists as well. So we've got that rich data of people we know who are reliable, but also new voices, because that's still always key to get new voices.
Right. Exactly. Makes sense. Well, Sean, this has been a absolutely fantastic session. I know we're coming up on time here, but any kind of final thoughts on how you think about kind of the tech stack, in terms of quant, qual, mixed methods? Like, what are some of the different kind of things that you feel like you've got to enable the team with as we wrap up here? Any kind of pieces that we didn't talk about?
I think it's always like, if you're able to, then if it's 2 tools or if it's 1 tool, make sure you have something in your tool stack that can enable both. Even if you're quant heavy or qual heavy, there's nothing stopping you, or there's nothing wrong with having both sort of resources available to you to help back each other up. If you're just going heavy on one, then you're going to miss some value on the other. So I think it's always good, even financially, if you can't bring on the tools, then your practices should still enable you to do both.
That's great to hear. I mean, I think we talk about this a lot, right? The difference between qual and quant. And I think as we're hearing from you, they are more integrated, right? That it doesn't have to be these two discrete camps at the end of the day, that actually every study can have a component of both, right? And every tool can have a component of both. And it's interesting to kind of hear that you don't think about them as super different either, right? That, hey, everything is kind of combined in some ways and we're doing a little bit of both.
Yeah, exactly that.
Well, Sean, this has been an absolutely fantastic session today. I know lots of resources that are there on the channel for folks to go investigate more if you want to check out that mural board or Sean's presentation about actually building the in-house panel. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. Thanks everybody for joining the show as well. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. So we're taking the next week off, but in 2 weeks' time, we'll have Leo from the Financial Times coming on to talk about all the sorts of new ways that they're collecting data to power rankings over at the FT. Sean, thanks again for being here. It's been a great one.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.